The California sun hangs high and heavy over the Hollywood hills, casting a brilliant, almost artificial glare on the landscape of excess. Winding asphalt snakes through hillsides dotted with architectural marvels, glass-walled mansions that seem to float over the sprawling city below, their infinity pools shimmering like sapphires against the terracotta earth. The air is thick with the scent of jasmine and exhaust fumes, a perfect paradox of nature and machine. This is a world built on image, where every lawn is manicured to perfection and every passing car is a statement. A low guttural roar disrupts the curated tranquility, a sound that doesn't belong to the local fauna, but to a predator of a different kind, a neon green McLaren 720 seconds, slicing through the tight curves with a flagrant disregard for the painted lines on the road, its engine screaming a challenge to the sleepy afternoon. Inside the cockpit of the McLaren, Jackson Jacques Ryder is the master of his universe. At 24, he possesses a beauty that seems sculpted by algorithms rather than genetic skin without a single pore, hair bleached to a perfect shade of Arctic blonde, and a jawline sharp enough to cut glass. He's draped in a chaotic collage of luxury brands, a Balenciaga hoodie over a Givenchy t-shirt, his wrist heavy with a gold Audemars Piguet that glints aggressively as he grips the steering wheel. One hand steers while the other holds his phone, his thumb flicking through a cascade of hearts and flames on his live stream. He isn't just driving, he's performing. His eyes, a cold, vacant blue, dart between the road and the screen, his self-worth measured in the climbing viewer count, a smirk permanently etched onto his face, radiating an aura of absolute unassailable arrogance. Suddenly, the vibrant digital world on his screen is fractured by the piercing wail of a siren, followed by the jarring flash of red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. A classic black and white LAPD cruiser, a relic of a different era compared to his futuristic vehicle, signals for him to pull over. Jacques' smirk tightens into a sneer of annoyance. He glides the supercar to a halt, the engine popping and crackling in the sudden silence. Emerging from the police car is Officer Frank Miller, 52 years of age, a man whose face is a roadmap of long shifts and too much lukewarm coffee. His uniform is immaculate, but visibly worn at the cuffs and collar. He moves with a deliberate, unhurried pace, his posture straight, his eyes clear and observant, taking in every detail of the scene with a practiced calm that stands in stark contrast to Jacques' frantic, performative energy. The moment Frank Miller reaches the driver's side window, Jacques pivots his phone, ensuring his millions of followers have a perfect view. The influencer's voice drips with condescension as he speaks, not to the officer, but to his audience. You guys seeing this? This fossil's about to get a taste of the 21st century. He rolls down the window just enough to speak through the gap. Before Miller can even utter his standard license and registration, Jacques unleashes the line he's been rehearsing in his head, a verbal dagger polished for maximum viral impact. Do you know who I am? He scoffs, his laughter sharp and cruel. He gestures dismissively at the officer's uniform. This traffic stop probably costs less than the shoes I'm wearing. The phrase hangs in the air, a declaration of war between two different worlds, as the small red light on Officer Miller's bodycam blinks steadily, silently, capturing every single word. We hope this story captures your heart. If you want to see what happens next, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. The digital wildfire spread with terrifying speed. Within an hour, Jacques' live stream clip, now edited into a slick, shareable format with dramatic captions, had surpassed 10 million views. His phone buzzed incessantly, a constant vibration against the cold marble of his kitchen island. Each notification was a hit of pure dopamine, a validation that washed over his deep-seated insecurities. He read the comments aloud to the empty, cavernous space of his minimalist penthouse. Legend 1 read, "Finally, someone puts these power-tripping cops in their place," said another. He was their hero, their gladiator fighting against the mundane establishment. He felt powerful, invincible, a king surveying his digital kingdom from a throne of glass and steel, completely oblivious to the fact that the entire structure was built on a foundation of carefully curated lies and crippling debt. He scrolled through his analytics, watching the follower count tick upwards in a hypnotic rhythm. 15 million, 15.1, 15.2. Brands that had previously been hesitant were now flooding his agent's inbox with lucrative offers. This wasn't just a traffic stop. It was a career-defining moment. He walked over to his floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the glittering expanse of Los Angeles. He couldn't see the individual people, only the collective glow of the city, a city he felt he now owned. Yet, in the reflection on the glass, he saw a fleeting image, not of a king, but of a pale, anxious young man whose entire sense of self was outsourced to the whims of strangers on the internet. The feeling vanished as quickly as it came, buried under another wave of notifications. Miles away, in a quiet suburban neighborhood of the San Fernando Valley, Officer Frank Miller pulled his personal, decade-old Ford sedan into the driveway of his modest bungalow. The house was small, but filled with a life Jacques' penthouse could never comprehend. Faded family photos on the mantelpiece, a half-finished crossword on the coffee table, the scent of his wife Sarah's beef stew simmering in the kitchen. He walked in and dropped his keys into a ceramic bowl his son had made in elementary school. Sarah met him at the door, her face etched with a familiar worry. She held her phone in her hand, the screen glowing with Jacques' arrogant face. "Frank, have you seen this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, the noise from the online world already breaching the sanctuary of their home. Frank sighed, the weight of his 25-year career settling heavily on his shoulders. He had faced down armed robbers and navigated violent domestic disputes, but this felt different, more insidious. He watched the clip, his own stoic face appearing on the screen as a villain in someone else's story. He saw the cascade of hateful comments scrolling beneath. "Just some punk kid with a phone, Sarah." "It's nothing," he said, trying to reassure her, and perhaps himself. But as he looked into her eyes, he saw a genuine fear he hadn't seen in years. This wasn't a physical threat that could be neutralized with training and backup. It was an assault on his character, his name, his very identity, broadcast to the world for sport. The stew suddenly smelled less comforting. The following morning, the nothing had metastasized. Jacques' followers, empowered by their anonymity, had doxed Frank. His home address, phone number, and even details about his son's college were circulating on fringe forums and social media threads. The phone began ringing at dawn, with voices on the other end ranging from taunting teenagers to genuinely menacing threats. A local news van was parked across the street, its telescopic camera lens aimed at their front window, like a sniper rifle. Sarah had drawn all the curtains, transforming their sunny home into a dim, besieged fortress. Frank felt a cold, simmering rage build in his chest, a feeling he was trained to suppress but now found difficult to contain. His private life, his family's safety, had become collateral damage in an influencer's quest for more clicks. Emboldened by his surging popularity, Jacques saw an opportunity to prolong his moment in the spotlight. His agent, a sharp woman named Chloe with a predator's smile, called him, her voice electric with excitement. "Jacques, this is gold, pure unadulterated gold," she exclaimed. "We can't just let this be a one-day story. You need to be the face of rebellion. You contest the ticket. You file a harassment complaint. You become the victim of a corrupt, outdated system." Jacques listened, the idea taking root in his mind. It wasn't about justice or truth. It was about narrative. It was about solidifying his brand. The insecurity that gnawed at him was momentarily silenced by the prospect of becoming even more famous, more relevant. "Do it," he said, the decision made with a chilling lack of hesitation. The official complaint landed on the desk of Captain Davis at the Hollywood Division Precinct. Davis was a man who navigated the political minefields of the LAPD with practiced ease, and he saw Jacques Ryder's complaint not as a matter of right and wrong, but as a public relations crisis. He summoned Frank to his office, the door closing with a soft but definitive click. The captain's office was sleek and modern, decorated with departmental plaques and photos of him shaking hands with city council members. He gestured for Frank to sit, his face a mask of professional concern. "Frank," he began, his tone smooth, "this situation with the Ryder kid. It's gotten messy. The media is having a field day. We're getting calls from the commissioner's office." Captain Davis leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Look, the kid's an idiot. We all know that. But he has an audience of millions. Optics, Frank. That's the game now. Maybe you were a little firm. Maybe we can make this go away. A simple apology. We drop the ticket, and everyone moves on." It's a bad look for the department. The implication was clear. Frank was expected to sacrifice his personal and professional integrity for the sake of institutional damage control. He was being asked to validate a lie to appease a mob that had threatened his family. Every instinct, honed over 25 years of service, screamed in protest. The suggestion was more offensive to him than any of Jox's on-camera insults. Frank looked at his superior, his expression unreadable. He had respected Davis once, but now he saw just another administrator more concerned with public image than with the truth. "No, sir," Frank said, his voice quiet but unyielding. "I conducted a lawful traffic stop for reckless driving. The driver was operating his vehicle at a speed that endangered public safety. He then chose to publicly humiliate me. I will not be apologizing, and I will not be dropping the ticket." He spoke with a simple, declarative finality. This was no longer just about a speeding violation. It was about the fundamental principle of his job. If the facts no longer mattered, then nothing he did mattered. His stand was absolute. Meanwhile, Jox and his newly hired lawyer, Marcus Thorne, held a press conference on the steps of Thorne's Beverly Hills office. Thorne was everything Frank was not, impeccably dressed in a tailored Italian suit, with a media-friendly smile and a vocabulary of weaponized sound bites. He painted a masterful picture for the assembled cameras, portraying Jox not as an arrogant speeder, but as a dynamic, young entrepreneur unfairly targeted by an older, resentful officer, a symbol of a generational clash. "This isn't about a traffic ticket," Thorne declared, his voice resonating with theatrical gravitas. "It's about a decorated public servant abusing his power to intimidate a citizen he simply does not understand. We are filing a formal harassment complaint to ensure that no one else has to endure what Mr. Ryder did." The official LAPD machine ground into motion. Frank was notified that Internal Affairs had opened an investigation based on Jox's complaint. He was ordered to surrender his bodycam, his notebook, and to provide a formal sworn statement. He sat in a sterile, windowless room, recounting the simple facts of the traffic stop to two unsmiling detectives who listened with detached professionalism. The process felt accusatory, as if he were the one who had committed a crime. He had followed protocol to the letter, yet he was the one under scrutiny, his every action dissected and questioned, all because a celebrity had decided to make him a villain for content. The department he had dedicated his life to was now treating him like a liability. The pressure at home was becoming unbearable. Sarah would jump every time the phone rang and had stopped watching the local news entirely. Their son, Kevin, who was studying engineering to states away, called every night, his voice tight with anger and frustration. "Dad, the things they're saying about you online. I got into a fight in the dorms with a guy who was laughing at that video." Frank felt a pang of guilt, a feeling that his stubborn adherence to principle was causing his family to suffer. He was supposed to be their protector, but by doing his job, he had invited a storm of anonymous hatred into their lives, and he felt powerless to stop it. In stark contrast, Jox's world was ascending to new heights. The rebel narrative had attracted a new set of sponsors, streetwear brands, energy drink companies, and mobile games that wanted to capitalize on his anti-establishment image. He was a guest on a wildly popular podcast where he recounted a heavily embellished version of the traffic stop, portraying himself as a calm, respectful victim of unprovoked aggression. He absorbed the host's sympathetic nods and the audience's adulation, the lie growing more real to him with each retelling. He was no longer just playing a character. He was becoming it, the line between Jackson Ryder and Jox, the influencer, blurring into non-existence. One night, unable to sleep, Jocks found himself scrolling deep into the comments section of a news article about his case. Past the initial wave of praise and support, he found a more critical thread. A user with a profile picture of a speedometer had written a detailed post analyzing the road, the car, and the engine's sound from the video, estimating his speed was likely close to 100 miles per hour. "This isn't a hero. It's a public menace who's going to kill someone," the comment concluded. A cold spike of anxiety pierced through Jocks's manufactured confidence. He quickly blocked the user and reported the comment, but the words lingered. It was a single, sober voice in a chorus of adoration, and it terrified him. The city attorney's office, initially inclined to dismiss the case as a minor infraction, began to take a harder look. The public profile of the case meant they couldn't just sweep it under the rug. A sharp, ambitious deputy city attorney named Eva Ramirez was assigned the file. She was in her early 30s, part of a new generation of prosecutors who were tech-savvy and unmoved by celebrity status. She read the initial reports and Jocks's complaint, sensing an underlying arrogance that didn't align with the victim narrative. She scheduled a meeting with Officer Miller, wanting to hear his side of the story directly from him, without the filter of departmental politics. Frank sat across from Eva Ramirez in her small, cluttered office, a world away from the polished spaces of Captain Davis and Marcus Thorne. She listened intently as he recounted the events of the traffic stop, her eyes never leaving his. He didn't embellish or editorialize. He just stated the facts as he remembered them. He spoke about the car's excessive speed, the driver's refusal to provide a license, and the verbal abuse that followed. When he finished, Ramirez was silent for a moment. "Officer Miller," she said, her tone serious, "I believe you, and I have no intention of letting this man use his fame to mock the law." For the first time in weeks, Frank felt a sliver of hope. Eva Ramirez's first official action was to file 2 subpoenas. The first was for the full, unedited bodycam footage from Officer Miller's device. The second, more unconventional request was directed to McLaren North America, demanding the complete vehicle telemetry data from Jock's rider's least 720 seconds for the date and time of the incident. Frank, sitting in on the meeting, was stunned. He was an old-school cop. He knew about radar guns and eyewitnesses, but the idea of pulling data directly from the car's computer was something out of a science fiction movie. Ramirez explained that modern supercars record everything: speed, throttle position, braking force, GPS coordinates. If he was speeding, she said with a thin smile, the car itself will be our star witness. When Marcus Thorne received the subpoena for the telemetry data, he initially scoffed. He called Jocks and assured him it was a desperate, theatrical move by an inexperienced prosecutor. "They're trying to intimidate you, Jocks. It's a fishing expedition. Don't worry about it," Thorne said, his voice a smooth balm of confidence. But after he hung up, Thorne's smile faded. He made a discreet call to a contact in the automotive industry. The answer he received was unsettling. The data was not only recorded, but was also stored in a tamper-proof module. It was absolute. The cold, hard numbers would exist, and the court could force them to be revealed. The fishing expedition might just hook a whale. Pending the outcome of the internal affairs investigation, Frank was placed on administrative desk duty. The decision was framed as standard procedure, but it felt like a punishment. He spent his days in a basement office, filing paperwork and answering phones, the hum of the fluorescent lights a constant reminder of his exile. He felt like a caged animal, his skills and experience wasting away while his name was dragged through the mud. The job that had once given him a sense of purpose now felt like a source of profound humiliation. He was being erased, hidden away by the very department he had sworn to serve, all to avoid a PR headache. One evening, Frank came home later than usual, the smell of stale office air clinging to his clothes. Sarah found him in the garage, staring blankly at his old police academy graduation photo on the wall. "I'm thinking of quitting, Sarah," he said, his voice heavy with defeat. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm just a dinosaur. What's the point of fighting for a system that doesn't fight for you?" Sarah came and stood beside him, her hand finding his. "Frank Miller, you are not a quitter," she said fiercely. "You are the most honorable man I know. If you give up now, you let him win. You let them all win. You fight. You fight for your name, for your honor, and for the truth. I'll be right here." Her strength became his. Jacques's deposition was held in a sterile conference room at a neutral law firm. Stripped of his live stream audience and the fawning adoration of his fans, he seemed smaller, less formidable. Ava Ramirez conducted the questioning. She didn't raise her voice or show emotion. Her questions were like a surgeon's scalpel, precise and methodical. She had him recount his story multiple times, noting the small inconsistencies that emerged with each telling. "Mr. Ryder, you stated you were driving at a reasonable speed. Could you define what reasonable means to you on a road with a posted limit of 25 miles per hour?" Jacques stammered, his usual glib responses failing him under the pressure of a sworn oath. The call from McLaren's legal department to Marcus Thorne was brief and brutally clear. The telemetry data had been retrieved pursuant to the subpoena and would be provided to the city attorney's office. It was not open to negotiation. After hanging up, Thorne stared at his office wall for a full 5 minutes before calling Jacques. He dropped the professional pretense. "They have it, Jacques," he said, his voice flat. "They have the car's data. They know exactly how fast you are going." A heavy silence filled the line before Jacques erupted. "What? You told me it was nothing. Can't you fix this? Bribe someone? Make it go away. That's what I pay you for." The panic in Jacques's voice was raw and unfiltered. For the first time, the real-world consequences of his actions breached the protective bubble of his digital fame. There was no filter, no edit button, no supportive comments to hide behind. There was only a set of numbers on a computer file, a cold, objective truth that could dismantle his entire empire. Thorne's response was equally cold. "This isn't social media, Jacques. This is a court of law. I can't make data go away. You lied. You lied in a sworn complaint, and you lied in your deposition. This has escalated from a traffic violation to potential perjury." The word hung in the air between them, terrifying and absolute. The reality of his situation began to suffocate Jacques. He was trapped in a narrative of his own creation. If he came clean now, his followers would turn on him for being a fraud. His sponsors would drop him. His entire identity, which he had so meticulously constructed, would shatter. But if he proceeded to trial, he would be walking into a courtroom where the prosecution held undeniable proof of his lie. He was paralyzed by the choice between two forms of destruction: a swift execution by public opinion, or a slow, methodical dismantling by the legal system. His anxiety manifested as rage, lashing out at his agent, his lawyer, anyone who couldn't offer him an easy way out of the cage he had built for himself. After a review by Internal Affairs found no evidence of misconduct, Frank was cleared and reinstated to full patrol duty. The news was a small victory, but the public case still loomed. The first day back in his cruiser felt different. Some younger officers avoided eye contact, while a few veterans gave him a subtle nod of support, a silent acknowledgement of the battle he was fighting for all of them. His partner, a cynical but loyal cop named Diaz, clapped him on the shoulder. "Good to have you back, Frank. Let's go show M what real policing looks like." The simple gesture of solidarity was a lifeline in a sea of hostility, reminding him that he wasn't entirely alone. The trial date was officially set for 2 months later. The media machine roared back to life, framing the upcoming court case as a landmark event. It was David versus Goliath, though who was David and who was Goliath depended on which news outlet you watched. For Jacques's followers, he was the brave individual standing up to a monolithic, corrupt police force. For others, he was the embodiment of entitled arrogance. For the legal analysts, it was a fascinating test case on the power of digital evidence versus celebrity testimony. The courtroom was booked, the press passes were issued, and the stage was set for a final confrontation between perception and reality. The night before the trial, Frank sat at his kitchen table, meticulously polishing his black leather dress shoes. The familiar smell of the wax and the rhythmic motion of the brush were calming, a ritual he had performed before every significant event in his career. He wasn't thinking about Jacques Ryder or the millions of people who hated him. He was thinking about the oath he took as a rookie, the promise to uphold the law impartially. He looked at his reflection in the mirror like shine of the shoe a man older, more tired, but with a gaze that was clear and resolute. He was ready to let the truth speak for him. In his penthouse high above the city, Jacques Ryder was also preparing, but his ritual was one of frantic anxiety. He paced the cold, polished concrete floors, the luxury goods surrounding him feeling like props on a movie set. He pulled up the original viral video on his oversized entertainment screen, watching it for the 100th time. He tried to see the confident, untouchable hero his followers saw. Instead, all he could see was the desperate, sneering face of a frightened boy, terrified of being exposed. The digital ghost on the screen mocked him, a constant reminder of the lie he was no longer sure he could control. He was the star of the show, and he had completely forgotten his lines. The legal teams made their final preparations. Marcus Thorne's strategy was to lean into the spectacle, to portray Jacques as a cultural icon and Miller as a relic. He planned to play the viral video in court, to sway the jury with the sheer power of public opinion. He would argue that the telemetry data was fallible, a product of flawed technology. His entire case was built on creating doubt, on turning the courtroom into another stage for Jacques's performance. He believed that if he could control the narrative, the facts wouldn't matter. He was betting that emotion and celebrity would trump evidence. Eva Ramirez's approach was the polar opposite. Her office was a fortress of facts, the walls covered with timelines, data charts, and transcripts. She wasn't preparing a performance. She was preparing a methodical presentation of irrefutable proof. Her star witnesses were not people, but a bodycam video file and a string of code from a car's computer. She instructed Frank to do nothing on the stand, but tell the simple, unvarnished truth, just as he had in her office. Her strategy relied on the belief that, in the sterile, controlled environment of a courtroom, the chaotic noise of social media would fade, leaving only the quiet, unshakable certainty of the facts. The financial pressure on Jacques was immense. His legal fees were astronomical, and while he projected an image of limitless wealth, the reality was a precarious balancing act of loans and short-term brand deals. A conviction, especially for perjury, would trigger clauses in his contracts, allowing sponsors to terminate their agreements and even demand their money back. Financial ruin was a very real possibility. This court case wasn't just about his reputation. It was about the survival of the entire hollow empire he had built. The weight of it all was crushing him, but showing any weakness was not an option his brand could afford. Frank, on the other hand, had nothing material to gain or lose. His pension was secure. His house was paid for. What was at stake for him was something far more valuable and infinitely more fragile: his honor. It was the only currency he had ever truly valued. He had spent a lifetime building a reputation for integrity, one traffic stop, one call, one report at a time. In a matter of days, a 24-year-old with a smartphone had threatened to burn it all to the ground. This trial was his only chance to reclaim it, to prove that his 25 years of service were not a lie. The connection between the two men, though adversarial, had become intensely personal. For Jacques, Frank was the embodiment of an authority that refused to bend to his influence, a real-world obstacle his digital power could not erase. Frank represented a reality that terrified him. For Frank, Jacques was the face of a new, cynical world that celebrated arrogance and mocked duty. He saw in the young influencer a profound emptiness, a moral vacuum that was being mistaken for charisma. They were two poles of a changing society, locked in a conflict that would define them both, far beyond the outcome of a simple traffic ticket. The courtroom was a theater of modern conflict. Every seat was filled, a tense mixture of stoic legal professionals, ravenous media members, and a vocal contingent of Jacques's young, loyal followers who had queued for hours to offer their support. The air hummed with anticipation, the low murmur of whispers punctuated by the frantic clicking of laptop keys. The initial atmosphere was palpably in Jacques's favor. His supporters radiated a confident energy, treating the proceedings less like a legal battle and more like the premiere of his latest, most daring piece of content. Jacques himself sat at the defense table, not in his usual loud streetwear, but in a tailored, sober navy suit designed to project an image of wronged maturity. He looked confident, occasionally flashing a subtle, reassuring smile to his fans in the gallery. When Jacques took the stand, he delivered the performance of a lifetime. Under the gentle guidance of his lawyer, Marcus Thorne, he recounted his version of events. His voice was steady, infused with a practiced vulnerability. He painted a picture of a young man enjoying a drive, only to be singled out and aggressively confronted by an officer who seemed to resent his very existence. He spoke of feeling intimidated and profiled, claiming his on-camera bravado was merely a defense mechanism against what he perceived as an abuse of power. He was charismatic, believable, and deeply sympathetic. The jury, a cross-section of ordinary citizens, seemed captivated by his narrative, their expressions softening as he spoke. The centerpiece of the defense's case was the viral video itself. Marcus Thorne dimmed the courtroom lights and played the clip on a large projection screen. The slickly edited footage, with its dramatic zoom-ins and captions highlighting Jacques' witty retorts, had a powerful effect. In this curated reality, Officer Miller appeared as a monolithic, intimidating figure, his silence interpreted as menacing. Jacques' infamous line, "This traffic stop probably costs less than the shoes I'm wearing," was framed as a defiant punch against a bully. The video ended, and a ripple of supportive murmurs went through the gallery. Thorne had successfully transported the biased court of public opinion directly into the courtroom itself, and for a moment it seemed like it might be enough. Thorne's cross-examination of Frank was an exercise in condescension. He probed and poked, attempting to portray the veteran officer as an out-of-touch relic, envious of a younger, more successful generation. "Officer," Thorne asked, his voice dripping with false sincerity, "would you say you're familiar with the world of social media? Do you understand what it means to be an influencer, to have a brand?" Frank remained impassive, his answers short and direct. "I understand what it means to be a peace officer, sir." He refused to take the bait, his quiet dignity a stark contrast to Thorne's theatricality, but the lawyer's narrative of a bitter old cop lashing out at a modern celebrity was undeniably taking hold. Then it was Eva Ramirez's turn. She walked to the podium not with a flourish, but with a quiet, deliberate confidence that instantly changed the energy in the room. She stood in silence for a moment, letting the echoes of Thorne's performance fade. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice clear and devoid of emotion, "Mr. Thorne and his client have presented you with a very compelling story. It's a story about feelings, about perception, about branding." She paused, making eye contact with each juror. "We are now going to set that story aside and present you with something else entirely, the facts." The simple declaration felt like a gauntlet being thrown down. Her first exhibit was Officer Miller's bodycam footage. "You've seen the edited version," she announced. "Now I would like you to see the full, unedited recording of the traffic stop, exactly as it happened, from Officer Miller's perspective." As the raw footage began to play, the courtroom fell into a stunned silence. The audio was clear, capturing the ambient sound of the wind, the crackle of the police radio, and every single word exchanged. The jury heard Frank's calm, repeated requests for a license and registration. They heard Jacques' escalating, venomous tirade, the full unedited stream of insults and arrogant refusals that his own video had conveniently omitted. The context shifted completely. The change in the jury box was visible. Brows furrowed. Sympathetic expressions hardened into masks of concentration, then disapproval. The man they saw on the bodycam footage was not the charming victim from the witness stand, but an aggressive, disrespectful, and belligerent driver. They saw Frank Miller standing his ground with almost superhuman patience, enduring a barrage of personal attacks without once raising his voice. At the defense table, Jacques' confident posture deflated. He stared at the screen, forced to watch his own unfiltered ugliness, his carefully constructed mask beginning to crack under the weight of the undeniable truth. He was no longer the hero of the story. When the video ended, a heavy silence hung in the air. Ava Ramirez didn't comment on it. Instead, she called her next witness to the stand, Dr. Alistair Finch, a senior diagnostics engineer from McLaren. Dr. Finch was a calm academic man who spoke about complex technology in simple, accessible terms. He explained to the jury that the McLaren 720 like all modern supercars, is equipped with a telemetry data recorder, often called a black box, which continuously records hundreds of data points, including precise speed, GPS location, throttle input, and braking. He explained that this data is tamper-proof and is considered forensically accurate. Ramirez then projected her second exhibit onto the large screen. It wasn't a video, but a stark, clinical graph. A timeline ran along the bottom, and a sharp blue line represented the car's speed. Dr. Finch, Ramirez asked, could you please direct the jury's attention to the data point recorded at 2:17 p.m., the exact moment Officer Miller's cruiser activated its lights, as time-stamped on his bodycam footage. Dr. Finch used a laser pointer to indicate a dramatic, Everest-like peak on the graph, a point where the blue line had soared far above the rest of the data. The entire courtroom held its breath, their eyes fixed on the simple, damning spike. At that precise moment, Dr. Finch stated, his voice calm and certain, the vehicle's telemetry shows that it was traveling at a speed of 92.7 miles per hour. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. The number was not an estimate or an opinion. It was a cold, hard, scientific fact. The posted speed limit on that winding, residential road was 25 miles per hour. The sound of the revelation was like a physical blow, sucking the air out of the room and obliterating every last shred of Jock's rider's credibility. The story was over. Only the truth remained, displayed for all to see in a single, brutal number. All eyes turned to Jock's. The transformation was terrifying to behold. The golden, confident influencer was gone, replaced by a pale, trembling young man. The color had drained from his face, leaving his skin a waxy, translucent white. His mouth hung slightly agape, and his eyes, wide with pure, unadulterated terror, were locked on the graph on the screen. It was the face of someone whose entire world, every lie he had ever told himself and others, had just been vaporized in an instant. There was no performance left, no brand to hide behind, only the raw, pathetic fear of being caught. Across the courtroom, Frank Miller watched the young man's public unraveling. He felt no surge of triumph, no satisfying rush of victory. Instead, a wave of profound sadness washed over him. He wasn't looking at an arrogant celebrity anymore. He was looking at a broken kid who had built a prison of lies and had just been handed a life sentence. This moment of vindication felt less like a celebration and more like a tragedy. It was the necessary conclusion, the triumph of fact over fiction, but seeing the utter destruction of another human being, even one who had caused him so much pain, brought him no joy. Marcus Thorne, for his part, was stunned into a rare moment of speechlessness. He attempted a frantic cross-examination of Dr. Finch, throwing out desperate questions about potential malfunctions and data corruption, but his arguments crumbled against the engineer's calm, unshakable expertise. The science was sound. The data was absolute. The lawyer's bluster and showmanship were useless against an immutable fact. He had brought a story to a data fight, and he had been utterly annihilated. He sat down, defeated, avoiding the terrified gaze of his client. In her closing statement, Ava Ramirez walked slowly before the jury box, her voice never rising above a conversational tone. She didn't need to be loud. The evidence had already done the shouting. For the past 2 days, the defense has asked you to believe in a feeling, a perception, a brand, she said softly. She then turned and pointed, first to the frozen image of the telemetry data on the screen, and then to Frank Miller, who sat with quiet dignity. We have asked you to believe in evidence. The defense has presented a story. We have presented the truth, measured in miles per hour. The defense has presented an influencer. We have presented a public servant. The choice is yours. The jury was out for only 45 minutes. The brevity of their deliberation was its own verdict. When they filed back into the jury box, Their faces were grim and resolved. The court clerk took the verdict slip from the foreman, his hand steady. Jacques Ryder was on his feet, swaying slightly, his lawyer's hand on his arm to keep him upright. The foreman stood and cleared his throat, his voice echoing in the silent room. On the charge of reckless driving, we the jury find the defendant, Jackson Ryder, guilty. On the charge of perjury, we find the defendant guilty. The judge's gavel struck the block, the sharp crack sealing Jacques' fate. The sound seemed to break the spell in the courtroom. Jacques' followers sat in stunned silence. Their hero toppled from his pedestal. Reporters sprinted for the doors. Jacques himself seemed to fold inward, slumping into his chair as if his bones had turned to dust, a choked sob escaping his lips. Across the aisle, Frank Miller did not smile. He simply closed his eyes, took a long, slow breath in, and then let it out, releasing months of tension, fear, and humiliation. The weight was finally gone. The truth had been enough. The day of sentencing was a somber affair, stripped of the trial's theatricality. Jacques Ryder stood before the judge, no longer the defiant influencer, but a humbled, visibly frightened young man. The judge, an experienced jurist with a reputation for stern fairness, looked down at him not with anger, but with a deep sense of disappointment. "Mr. Ryder," she said, her voice filling the silent courtroom, "you commanded an audience of millions, a platform that could have been used for good. Instead, you used it to promote a dangerous brand of arrogance and deceit. The most serious crime you committed was not on the road, but under oath. You poisoned the well of truth for your own personal gain. His sentence was not prison, but a path toward humility, a 2-year license suspension, a substantial fine to be paid to a victim's charity, and 500 hours of mandatory community service." The fallout in the digital world was swift and merciless. The guilty verdict became a trending topic, and the tide of public opinion, once so firmly in his favor, turned against him with ferocious speed. Memes mocking his courtroom breakdown replaced posts praising his rebellion. News headlines screamed his downfall. Jacques Ryder canceled. Sponsors sever ties with disgraced influencer. Ryder loses 4 million followers in 24 hours. The empire of perception he had so carefully constructed was dismantled overnight. His agent, Chloe, sent a curt email officially terminating their contract, and Marcus Thorne's invoices were the last communication he received from his lawyer. The buzzing phone finally fell silent. He was alone in the wreckage. Weeks later, a very different Jacques Ryder could be seen in a public park in a low-income neighborhood of Los Angeles. He was stripped of his designer labels, wearing steel-toed boots, worn jeans, and a bright orange vest that marked him as a community service worker. His task was to remove graffiti from the walls of a community center. The physical labor was foreign and exhausting. His hands, once used only for typing and steering supercars, were soon raw and stained with paint stripper. There was no audience, no camera, no adoring fans. There was only the sun beating down on his back and the slow, arduous work of scrubbing away layers of spray paint, a stark metaphor for the life he now had to clean up. During a lunch break, he sat on a worn park bench, eating a simple sandwich from a paper bag. He watched a father teach his young daughter how to ride a bicycle, her squeals of delight echoing in the afternoon air. He saw a group of teenagers laughing, their camaraderie easy and genuine. These were simple, uncurated moments of pure human connection, a currency he had never understood or valued. A profound and aching emptiness opened up inside him as he realized his multi-million-dollar life had been utterly bankrupt of anything real. For the first time, he wasn't performing sadness or contemplating a brand strategy. He was simply, genuinely, feeling the weight of his own loneliness. That evening, in the small, rented apartment he had moved into after his penthouse lease was terminated, Jacques sat down with a pen and a single sheet of plain paper. He began to write, the words coming slowly and without their usual glibness. It was not a public statement or a scripted apology. It was a letter addressed to Officer Frank Miller. In it, he took full and complete responsibility for his actions. He didn't make excuses or blame his persona. He simply apologized for his arrogance, for the lies he told, and for the harm he had caused the officer and his family. He wrote that he was sorry, and for the first time in his adult life, he truly meant it. Back at the Hollywood Division Precinct, life for Frank Miller was slowly returning to its familiar rhythm. Captain Davis called him into his office, the same room where he had once been pressured to drop the case. This time, the captain's tone was different. With no one else present, he offered Frank a formal departmental commendation for integrity and professionalism under extreme public pressure. He also offered a quiet, personal apology. "I was wrong to ask you to bend, Frank. You reminded this department and me what our badge is supposed to stand for." It was a quiet moment of vindication, more meaningful to Frank than any public ceremony could ever be. The peace was most palpable at home. The news vans that had lined their street were long gone. The incessant, hateful ringing of the phone had ceased. One evening, Frank, Sarah, and their son Kevin, who was home for a weekend visit, sat around the dinner table, sharing stories and laughing. The oppressive cloud of stress and fear that had hung over their family for months had finally lifted. The simple domestic scene was a testament to their resilience. They had weathered the storm together, their familial bond strengthened by the adversity they had faced and overcome. Frank looked at his wife and son, his heart full of a quiet, profound gratitude. On patrol, Frank felt a renewed sense of purpose. The ordeal hadn't made him bitter. It had deepened his empathy. During a routine stop for a broken taillight, he approached a car driven by a young, visibly nervous teenager. Seeing the boy's fear, Frank deliberately softened his tone, explaining the issue calmly and even showing the young driver how to check his lights. He ended the interaction not with a ticket, but with a simple warning and a drive safe. He saw not a potential adversary, but a kid who needed guidance, a small chance to prove that authority could also be a source of reassurance and help, not just punishment. A few days later, an envelope with no return address, addressed simply to Officer F. Miller, arrived in the precinct's mail. Frank opened it in the quiet of the locker room and found Jox's handwritten letter. He read the simple, direct words, recognizing the stark absence of the influencer's usual bravado. There was a raw honesty to the apology that surprised him. He could feel the young man's shame and remorse in the unsteady scrawl of the pen. Frank read it twice, then folded the single sheet of paper and tucked it into his locker. He would not respond. There was nothing more to be said. The apology was accepted in the silence. The chapter was finally, truly closed. The neon glare of fame had faded, leaving behind the steady, enduring light of character. Frank Miller continued his patrols, a quiet guardian in a city obsessed with noise, his integrity not a brand to be marketed, but a principle to be lived. He had proven that the truth, even when it is unpopular and unglamorous, has its own undeniable power. The story's true moral was written not in the headlines of Jox's downfall, but in the quiet normalcy of Frank's life, a life dedicated to the simple, profound idea that what you do when you think no one is watching is who you really are. And in the end, character is the only thing that endures. Epilogo 1 year later, Officer Frank Miller stands beside a rookie patrol car, patiently guiding a young officer, Maria Sanchez, through the de-escalation techniques for a difficult traffic stop. "Remember, Sanchez," he says, his voice calm and steady, "respect is a two-way street. But our side of the street is the one we control. Keep your calm, state the facts, and let your camera do the talking." He is a mentor now, passing on the hard-won wisdom that integrity is the most effective tool on their belt. His legacy would not be one of viral fame, but of quiet competence and unwavering honor, passed down to the next generation of officers. Elsewhere, a local news channel features a segment on digital literacy in high schools. The guest speaker is Jackson Ryder. He is dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans, the flashy brands and bleached hair gone. He looks healthier, calmer. He speaks to the students with a quiet authenticity that is more compelling than his old persona ever was. "Your online self. It's not you," he says, his voice steady. "It's an echo. And if you listen to that echo for too long, you forget your own voice. The most valuable thing you have isn't your follower count. It's your character." Don't trade it for anything. He is no longer an influencer, but a cautionary tale, finally using his voice for something true. In a world full of filters and curated realities, what do you believe is truly priceless? Leave a little heart if you believe integrity is more powerful than any influence. Subscribe for more stories where truth finds its voice. Comment character is everything if you believe in the power of doing the right thing, especially when the cameras are on.